She said the house was ours. We painted the walls together, built the garden from scratch, and even etched our initials into the concrete patio. So why did I find a deed with only her name on it, months after she changed the locks? When I first met Emily, I was living paycheck to paycheck, fixing HVAC units and dreaming of something better. She was different, calm, sharp, full of ideas. We clicked fast. Within a year, we were planning our future, and not long after, we put a down payment on a small house just outside of town. It wasn't much: cracked siding, an overgrown yard, a leaky roof. But we saw it as a canvas, something we could fix up together. I worked double shifts to pay for materials while Emily handled the finances, kept track of the mortgage, and helped choose paint colors and floor tiles. We spent weekends sweating in the sun, hauling mulch, sanding cabinets, arguing over tile patterns, and laughing about how terrible we were at installing shelves. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. At least that's what I thought. I remember the day we finished the back patio. I carved our initials into the wet cement with a stick. E+J. We stood there barefoot, drinking lemonade, talking about one day raising kids who'd ride bikes in that very backyard. It felt real, solid, like we were building something that would last. Looking back, I realize how blind I was. I handled the manual labor, the sweat and blisters, while she handled the paperwork, the legal side, the bank meetings, the mortgage statements. I didn't question it. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. I don't think love should come with fine print, but maybe it always does, and I just never read the terms. Still, in that moment, fresh concrete on our shoes, her hand in mine, I believed in us completely. That little house felt like the safest place on earth. I had no idea that the walls we painted together would one day shut me out. But the cracks were already forming, even if I couldn't see them yet. At first, the changes were small. So small, I told myself I was imagining things. Emily started locking her phone. She used to leave it lying around the house, on the counter while she cooked, on the armrest while we watched movies. But suddenly it was always face down, and she'd slide it into her pocket if I so much as glanced at it. She also became distant, not cold exactly, but distracted. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Conversations that once lasted for hours were now reduced to short nods and distracted hums. I'd ask about her day, and she'd wave it off like it didn't matter. I figured maybe it was stress. Her work had picked up. She mentioned her boss piling on more responsibility, longer hours, new deadlines. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But there were other signs too. She stopped wanting to go out on weekends. She started spending more time running errands, though I never saw bags or receipts. Sometimes she'd come home hours later than expected, smelling like someone else's cologne, faint but sharp like pine and smoke. When I asked about it, she laughed and said I was being dramatic. I remember one Sunday morning I caught her sitting in the guest room, staring at a manila folder on her lap. When she noticed me, she slammed it shut so fast you'd think it had bitten her. She smiled, tight, uncomfortable, and said it was just some paperwork from work. I nodded, but my chest tightened. Something didn't feel right. I told myself she was tired, that we both were, that every couple goes through dry spells, through quiet patches. But late at night, lying awake beside her, I started wondering if I was sharing a bed with someone I didn't really know anymore. Still, I clung to the image of us, the couple who built a life from nothing, who carved their initials into concrete. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that it would pass. But some cracks don't heal. They just spread deeper until the whole foundation gives way. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I came home early from a canceled job, some wiring issue at a commercial site. Emily wasn't home. I figured I'd surprise her with dinner, maybe pick up her favorite sushi. I told myself we needed a win, something to bring us back together. The power had flickered earlier that day, so I went down to the basement to check the breaker. While down there, I noticed a box on the shelf labeled old tax stuff. The lid wasn't on right. I nudged it, and a few envelopes slipped out. I bent down to stuff them back in, but one caught my eye. It was a deed for our house. Only it wasn't in both of our names. It was just hers. At first, I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe a form she filled out wrong or a refinance thing I'd forgotten about. But as I kept reading, a sick feeling bloomed in my stomach. The date on the paperwork was from 8 months ago. She had quietly refinanced the house and transferred the deed entirely into her name, without my knowledge or consent. I sat on the basement floor, the paper shaking in my hands, listening to the distant sound of rain tapping against the ground-level window. My heart pounded. I kept flipping through the folder, finding more documents, notarized forms, bank communications, even a letter from her attorney. She hadn't just cut me out, she deplanned it. I don't know how long I sat there. Time stretched. My thoughts blurred together like smudged ink. The basement was cold, but I didn't feel it. All I could think was, why? We built this house together. Every nail, every coat of paint. How could she do this to me? To us? When I finally climbed back upstairs, everything looked the same. The pictures on the walls, the couch we picked out together, the coffee mug with a chip in it that she always used. But now it all felt staged, like a set in a play I didn't belong in anymore. The home I thought we shared wasn't mine. It never was. When Emily got home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen, the deed spread out on the counter like evidence in a trial. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I just asked one question. Why? She froze. For a second, she didn't even try to lie. She just sighed, not with guilt, but with annoyance, like I was making things harder than they needed to be. I knew you'd find it eventually, she said, placing her purse on the table. But I didn't want to have this conversation like this. Like this, like what, while I still had questions, while I still had a shred of hope. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, cool and composed. You were always too trusting with the paperwork. I handled the mortgage, the taxes, the refinance. You didn't care about that stuff, so I made a decision. You made a decision that erased me, I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. She shrugged. You act like I stole something. The house is in my name now. That doesn't change the fact that you live here. I stared at her, stunned. I wasn't even sure who I was looking at anymore. You did it behind my back. It was just easier, she said. Look, it's not personal, it's just smart planning. We needed financial clarity, clean lines. Clean lines, that's how she saw it. Not a betrayal, not a violation, just a transaction. I loved you, I whispered. I thought this was our life, our home. She didn't flinch. Don't be dramatic. Those words cracked something open in me. Not just sadness, something colder, heavier, like the floor had dropped out beneath me. I walked out that night, drove to a motel on the edge of town with a half-packed bag and my heart in pieces. I sat on the bed staring at the ceiling, realizing the woman I loved had slowly erased me from the life we built, and I hadn't even noticed. It wasn't just betrayal, it was deletion. And I had no idea what to do next. I spent the first 2 nights in that motel, barely sleeping. The silence in the room was loud, unfamiliar. The walls were paper-thin, the bed too stiff, and the air smelled like stale coffee and bleach. It wasn't home, but then again, neither was the place I'd just left. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Emily to text, to apologize, to explain. But she didn't. Not a word, not even to ask where I was. It was like I'd vanished from her world, and maybe in her mind I had. I tried calling a few friends, but they were mostly her friends too. One offered a couch for a night or two, but it came with awkward questions and hesitant glances, like I was some lost animal on their porch. I declined. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to feel steady again. I drove past the house once around midnight. The lights were off. My truck rolled quietly down the street as I stared at the dark windows. I could still see the garden bed we built together. The rose bush I planted for our anniversary was blooming. Red, full, unaware that the man who planted it was no longer welcome there. The reality was setting in. I had no key, no claim, no place. I'd put everything into that home, physically, emotionally, financially. And yet, with a few quiet signatures and one cold conversation, I'd been erased from it. I checked my bank account. I had enough for a couple of weeks, maybe a month if I stretched it. I'd never really planned for this, to be suddenly single, homeless, betrayed. I went to work, kept my head down, said as little as possible. Every nail I hammered, every pipe I fixed, it all felt distant, like I was watching my own life through fogged glass. One morning, eating cheap eggs from a microwave tray, I realized something painful. I had nothing left to lose. No house, no wife, no plan, just the shell of a man who thought love was enough. But that emptiness, it had space in it. And space, I would learn, can be dangerous in the right hands. About 3 weeks after I left, I finally pulled myself together enough to meet with a lawyer. I wasn't sure what I hoped to get out of it. Maybe just some kind of closure, or the tiniest legal thread to tie me back to the house. But sitting in that office, with the smell of old books and bitter coffee in the air, I quickly learned how little power I had. The house is in her name, the attorney said, scanning the paperwork I'd brought. Legally, she owns it outright. Unless you can prove coercion or fraud, it's going to be hard to challenge. I felt like I'd been punched again. My chest tightened, my palms went cold. But then she added, however, if you suspect anything illegal in how she handled the finances, that's a different story. I didn't know what I was looking for, but something in me lit up. I'd spent so long just feeling lost. This was the first flicker of a path forward. That night I started digging. I still had access to one of our old shared folders. She must have forgotten to remove me. There were years of files, tax returns, invoices, statements. I scrolled through them for hours, barely blinking, not even sure what I was hoping to find. But then I did. Several deposits into an account I didn't recognize, large amounts, inconsistent with her regular salary. A name I didn't know showed up on a couple of scanned invoices, listed under consulting. When I searched the name, no real business came up. I kept going. Over the next few days, more things popped up. Underreported income on tax returns. Business write-offs for things that had nothing to do with business, expensive handbags, salon visits, even a weekend at a luxury resort I'd never heard about. My hands shook as I pieced it together. She wasn't just hiding the house. She'd been hiding money, dodging taxes, and covering it all with fake paperwork. It was more than betrayal now, it was criminal. And for the first time since she shut that door on me, I didn't feel helpless. I felt focused. I always thought revenge was something loud. Smashing windows, screaming matches in the driveway, explosions of anger and shattered plates. But as I sat there surrounded by screenshots, printed statements, and hand-scribbled notes, I realized something. Real revenge is quiet, strategic, precise. Emily thought she'd buried me. She assumed I'd slink away, lick my wounds, and disappear. She thought I didn't have it in me to fight back. She was wrong. I took the next few days off work, told my boss I had some legal stuff to deal with. He didn't ask questions. I spent every hour combing through records, building a timeline, organizing files. I met with the lawyer again. This time I had folders. She raised her eyebrows as I laid everything out. "If what you're saying is accurate," she said slowly, flipping through the bank statements, "this is tax fraud and a decent amount of it." I nodded. "Can I report her?" "Yes," she said. "Not just to the IRS, to the state too. There's enough here to trigger an audit, maybe worse." It wasn't about spite anymore. It was about truth, about consequences. She hadn't just hurt me emotionally. She demanipulated the system, stolen money, hidden it, lied about it. And while she was doing it, she was planning my removal like a business deal. I submitted everything anonymously. Part of me wanted to call her, to tell her what was coming, to hear her panic. But I didn't. I wanted her to feel safe, comfortable. I wanted her to keep believing she'd won right up until the knock on the door. Because that's how people like her fall. Not by force, but by paperwork, by law, by the very system she thought she'd gamed. I didn't know what the IRS would do or how long it would take. But I knew enough to feel certain something was coming. And when it did, she'd realize what I already knew. The house she stole, it came with more than a mortgage. It came with consequences. It took about 7 weeks, 7 slow, grinding weeks of waiting. During that time, I went back to work full-time. I picked up extra shifts when I could. The motel room turned into something like home, sad but mine. I kept to myself, quietly watching life go on. Every now and then, I'd think about Emily, wonder if she was still sleeping peacefully in that house, sipping wine in our old living room with no clue what was coming. But I never reached out. I didn't need to. I had already set everything in motion. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an old neighbor. Her voice was low, curious, maybe a little excited. "Hey, did you know the IRS was at your house today?" My heart thumped once hard. "They were there for hours," she whispered. 2 guys in suits, briefcases. Emily looked pale. I hung up and didn't say a word. That night, I drove past the house again. I stayed far enough not to be noticed, but close enough to see the tension hanging in the air. The living room lights were on. Through the window, I saw Emily pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. She looked smaller somehow, like the confident, dismissive version of her had deflated. A week later, I heard more from my lawyer. Emily's accounts had been frozen. An official audit was underway. The penalties they were throwing at her weren't light. Back taxes, fines, potential fraud charges. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. But I can't lie, there was something deeply satisfying in knowing that the person who erased me was now being held accountable. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was justice. She took my house, so I gave her a new roommate, the kind that doesn't leave. The kind that goes through your drawers, asks about every dollar, and doesn't stop until they've picked your life clean. And suddenly, that big empty house didn't feel like such a prize anymore. The first call came on a Thursday night. I was eating takeout on the motel bed, watching some show I wasn't really paying attention to, when my phone lit up with her name. Emily. For a second, I just stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the answer button. My heart beat faster, not from hope, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had passed. I let it ring. Then again the next night. Then again 2 days later. She was persistent, just like always, when she needed something. I didn't pick up. Then came the text. "We need to talk, please." No apology, no explanation. Just that same calm, businesslike tone she always used when she wanted to control the conversation. But she had no leverage anymore, not this time. Another message came the next day. "The IRS is tearing everything apart. I know you had something to do with it." She still didn't get it. Still thought this was about revenge, about winning or losing. She couldn't grasp that this wasn't a game. This was truth catching up. I stared at her messages, feeling nothing. No rage, no sadness, not even satisfaction, just quiet. Peaceful, maybe. For the first time in months, I wasn't drowning in what-ifs or anger. I didn't reply. I deleted the messages. I understood now that there was no version of this where we fixed anything. There was no apology deep enough to rebuild what she had destroyed. Not just the house or the paperwork, but the trust, the partnership, the belief that we were ever truly building something together. She built something all right on lies. And now it was collapsing around her. The silence between us was final this time, not like before when I'd hoped it would break. This silence was earned and deserved. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the man who finally walked away and didn't look back. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small, single-story house with a blue door and a sagging porch that needed fixing. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a leaky faucet, and weeds creeping through the cracks in the driveway. But it was mine. I'd saved up, worked weekends, took side gigs. My lawyer helped me recover a small amount through civil mediation after the audit. It wasn't much, but it gave me enough to get started. The rest I earned the hard way with calloused hands and tired nights. I'd thought for a long time that home meant luxury, stability, a shared future. But now, standing there with a key that no one else had a copy of, I knew better. Home wasn't a person, it wasn't even a building. It was knowing that no one could take it from me again. I painted that blue door myself, ripped out the rotting boards and replaced them one by one. Each nail I drove into the wood felt like a statement, not of anger, but of healing. Of building something not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to. I heard through the grapevine that Emily ended up selling the house. Between the fines and penalties, she had no choice. Her new life wasn't as clean and crisp as the one she tried to curate. The IRS didn't forget, and they didn't leave quickly. She made herself look perfect on paper, but paper can burn fast when the wrong people read it. Funny thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and think about everything I lost. And then I look around at the peeling paint I fixed, the roses I planted in the front yard, and the silence that isn't lonely anymore, and I realize something simple. What she took from me gave me space to build something better. Something honest. Something real. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm just living.